Today's interview takes place at the White House, and we are so excited to be joined today by the Executive Director for the White House Crypto Council, Bo Hines, who is going to be discussing the much-anticipated White House Crypto Report that drops later today. And we have the first podcast exclusive on it. We're here at the White House. We're excited. Bo, thank you so much for joining us. How's your day going so far? Probably busy.
It's going to be a busy day, that's for sure. It's also an exciting day. The president, in his first executive order, created the Presidential Working Group on Digital Assets, which included all of the relevant agencies that would have something to do with what's going on in this space. It's obviously been a sea change getting Genius passed just a week and a half ago. Time flies. But, this is an industry, as I've said repeatedly, it's been broadly beaten down and kicked down. They were victims of policy making through persecution and prosecution. The president made big promises on the campaign trail as he made his run for a second term, and he's delivering on all of those. He created this working group as I'm the executive director, and we have our brilliant AI and crypto czar, David Sachs, who is the chair. But there's been so much work that's gone into this report with Tyler Williams over at Treasury, Secretary Bessent's been phenomenal, Chairman Atkins over at the SEC, Secretary Lutnick and his team, folks have stepped up in a huge way to contribute to this effort. Just making sure that we can actually create, a clear set of rules so that industry actors know what they need to do to be, lawful and compliant, and also innovate here in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And so that was really the objective of this report. Provide a list of recommendations to interagency actors to say, look, this is the most robust and clear regulatory framework that you can possibly have. And to the folks that have gone offshore, our message is, welcome home now. Here you go. This is the best place to do business. We want you engaged with our capital markets. We want you here in the U.S. innovating and thriving and building. We want you IPOing here. And I think that, this is a massive first step to accomplish all of those things.
The report is extensive for sure, and we definitely are going to dive into it after this recording, but we saw the fact sheet before, 160 pages. What are the key takeaways?
Well, look, it's everything, right? I mean, like in the stablecoin section, it's basically a restatement of Genius. We talk about, the implementation of the law and what that looks like. You'll see with market structure, we pull from a lot of what's in Clarity. Obviously, that had immense bipartisan support in the House. Now it's heading over to the Senate chamber, and Chairman Scott from Senate Banking is saying we're going to get this done before October. So we wanted to make sure that we were validating their work, showing that we appreciated how much had gone into this from the Hill perspective, and we'll talk about how those things will be applied from interagency, and you'll see that in this report as well. But we're extremely excited. I think that we've looked at this in three phases. Like we've had the demolition phase, and we've talked about removing a lot of the blue tape that existed under the Biden regime, as the president likes to call it, and more specifically, just breaking down the wall or barrier that prevented digital asset firms from interacting with traditional financial institutions. That was crucial. And basically what that means is eradicating anything that undergirded Operation Choke Point 2.0, which we all know is a very real thing at this point. And so, you'll see in this report, recommendations that continue to push in that direction of just making sure that there's a streamlined process for technological integration into the current system, because really, the greatest financial technology is coming out of this space. And if you want to be the leader of the globe, you have to adopt that technology, integrate it quickly, and continue to push forward. So we're hoping that the recommendations that we put forth here, both on market structure, obviously Genius being law now, will help aid in that process.
Modernizing bank regulations is part of one of the recommendations in the report. Can you elaborate on that? You did reference Operation Choke Point 2.0. It's a big concern for industry players going forward. Perhaps after this administration leaves office, are we going to be facing maybe Operation Choke Point 3.0? Are there any recommendations in this report that would prevent that?
Absolutely. I mean, look, there's no way that we're going to face an Operation Choke Point 3.0. I think one of the greatest ways to prevent that is through adoption. And, with Genius, you're seeing basically an archaic payment rail system be updated completely. I think this is one of the most revolutionary pieces of legislation as it applies to the space that you'll see or have seen in quite some time. Market structure will be no different, because obviously here now the exchanges know who the regulator is, what the regulator's authority is over the business that they're conducting. And they've been begging just for a clear set of rules, because they want to continue to operate here and service U.S. consumers and service U.S. financial institutions more generally. And so, we take a comprehensive look in this report. And again, something this big, it's hard to go into the minute specifics of every recommendation. But in terms of the regulators, you're seeing them come on side. You're seeing the guidance that's been offered over the course of the last several months. We hope that this streamlines that process, and we'll continue to build off of that.
I want to ask you about that interagency element. So obviously the president has done a great job of setting the agenda, putting out the executive order, and then you guys are following through on reinforcing, but also kind of delegating to all these agencies that need to cooperate to get all these policies done. So you mentioned obviously Chair Bessent, Atkins. A lot of clarity puts authority with the CFTC, hopefully over spot markets. The report mentions that. And there's been obviously a lot of speculation on the industry side that, perps are kind of going to be a done deal, that we're looking at a lot of updates there. Can you give us any insights on what the developments are in terms of just getting someone at the helm of the CFTC who can deliver on this agenda?
Well, look, the CFTC is going to be really important. Obviously, there's a dual regulatory regime that exists there, and we do complement the work that was done in clarity with this report. So you've expressed what that looks like pretty articulately. It is very important that we find a tremendous leader to be at the CFTC, and I know that the personnel team is going to work extremely hard to do that. And it could be Brian, it could be we'll see what happens. I think Brian's great. I think that we have just fantastic people across the administration, and this report wouldn't have been possible without any of them. Secretary Lutnick, Secretary Bessent, Chairman Atkins, folks that have contributed deeply to this report. They care about the space tremendously, and I think that in terms of the CFTC, the Limited Spot Market Authority, all of that good stuff, we'll need someone that truly understands the space as well.
Can you speak to the recent news about the White House pausing the nomination for Brian Quintenz, which is supposed to take place on Monday?
Well, look, I'm a policy guy, not a personnel guy, so I stay in my lane. We'll see what happens with that, but I've had fantastic interactions with Brian. I know that many folks in the industry are extremely supportive of him, and I think that the folks with the power to make decisions here will make the right one.
Back on the policy front, you talked about the Genius Act, which passed, and a lot of people in the industry were very excited about. The fact sheet also mentions a strengthening of the U.S. dollar with a dollar-backed stablecoin. Would the federal government ever issue one, or is there talks of that?
No, the federal government will never issue a stablecoin. We don't want to even flirt with the line of a CBDC. We've said the president's already banned a CBDC through executive order. Chairman Powell's actually come out and stated 3 separate times that it would take congressional action in order for a CBDC to be implemented. As part of that too, though, with Genius, and I've said this repeatedly, is this all but effectively destroys any prospect of a CBDC. When you can access, private enterprise and engage in that way, why would you ever want to use a government-backed stable? There's no purpose for it. There's no reason for it. We don't want Big Brother spying on the American consumers. We feel extremely strong about this, that a CBDC should never exist. And I think that Genius all but effectively accomplishes that.
I think the fact sheet also mentions kind of the strengthening of the position of the U.S. dollar, right? And we've seen through Genius, we're going to see a lot of private issuers hold a lot of T-bills. That's obviously good for kind of the resilience of our financial markets. Can you comment any further on how you can expect stables and our industry to be able to support the strength of the U.S. dollar?
Yeah, so look, David and I have outlined a vision from the first time that we met on transition to get to a place in which there's tokenized public securities and different rail systems. This acts as the foundation for that. Not only does it create more cost-effective, more transparent payment systems for the American consumer, it also lays the groundwork for basically being able to go in and out of asset classes at will. That's an extremely exciting prospect because if you're in a different country and you want to access U.S. capital markets at that point, you're going to have to use a dollar-backed stable. This will pull a lot more public securities on chain. And I think that ultimately it just helps undergird more innovation in this space. You're starting to see a lot of the larger traditional financial institutions announce that they're going to be adopting stablecoins, whether they create their own or work with partners that are already existing inside of the digital assets world. We'll see how this all plays out, but I think it's going to move very quickly. And I think it's truly going to revolutionize our financial system for decades to come. I think it secures U.S. dollar global dominance for decades to come. And who knows, maybe there's a world in which because of this, that the U.S. dollar is the only fiat currency that exists in 3 decades. We'll see what happens.
I think also, though, with stablecoin value at $250 billion, there's a lot of eyes on it, both from the good actor side and the bad actor side. And obviously, the government has to think about national security, too. So when it comes to now opening the floodgates for stablecoins, how do you think about kind of protecting the national security, maybe through private talent, privateer, something like that, in regards to groups like the North Korean Lazarus Group or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that private-public partnerships are extremely important in this space, partly because there's a knowledge gap that exists with certain regulators, but I think that's probably changed quite a bit over the course of the last 6 months. Folks in this administration truly get it, and they understand what it takes to propel this industry forward and make sure that the United States is a leader in digital asset financial technology. I think that there's a lot of misinformation as well about the illicit finance that happens in this space, partly because, of that misinformation that exists and the knowledge gap that exists as well. And so, like I said on Fox Business this morning, you have to be a very stupid criminal to use crypto to engage in nefarious activity, because we can track everything you do on chain. And I think the people that understand this, even at a base level, truly get that. So, we'll see how it evolves. I think that this actually permits us with the ability to offer, stronger consumer protections, meaning that if we're able to trace folks that are engaged in bad activity, then, that helps us protect the American consumer. And so I think it's exciting. I think that at the end of the day, there's a lot more bad activity that happens to traditional payment rails, because people have become very accustomed to using those ways in order to launder money or engage in nefarious activity. I think this actually crushes the prospect of that.
I don't know if you all have noticed this recently, but Avalanche has been on a roll. From FIFA launching their own Layer 1 on Avalanche, to VanEck unveiling the purpose-built fund to back ecosystem projects, the world is watching and building on Avalanche. Web3 gaming? Avalanche-based titles like MapleStory and Off the Grid have it covered. Finance? Avalanche has got that down pat too. Entertainment? Built for that as well. On top of that, starting in 2026, Sports Illustrated Stadium will be the first major sports venue to fully adopt blockchain ticketing powered by Avalanche. Backed by a strong network of builders and dedicated community, the momentum is accelerating on Avalanche for games, music, sports, finance, and more. Want to see how Avalanche is driving adoption? Go to avax.network and check it out.
The Bank Secrecy Act is a big element of this, obviously. It is mentioned in the report, clarity regarding BSA reporting requirements. There has been some question in industry whether the Trump administration might try and recommend an update or a modernization of the Bank Secrecy Act. Is that something you guys are looking at in terms of how this reporting might apply to decentralized software developers, the future of decentralized finance in the United States, as we're seeing with the Roman Storm case in the SDNY court right now?
Well, look, you've already seen the action that we've taken in regards to Tornado Cash, as Treasury dropped the sanctions there. Right. We still want to make sure that illicit financial activity doesn't happen, especially through state-sponsored activity. And so it's a balance. But at the end of the day, we understand that we're modernizing an archaic financial system through this technology. And we're going to do everything we can to protect the U.S. consumer while also protecting developers. We want people to be able to create here and innovate here in the U.S. without fear of prosecution. You can't go after creators for creating basically immutable smart contracts, open source code. We want those things to be developed here in the U.S. And we want to encourage folks to continue to engage in that for good reasons, right? And most of these products are used for healthy means of innovation. And we want to see that continue. And I think that we've made that very clear. I think in this report, the DeFi community will be extremely happy with where we land on a lot of these issues. And we understand that you have to use a scalpel here. It's extremely important. Every word matters when you're creating law or providing recommendations in regards to DeFi, and we take that very seriously.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that real quick. You said welcome home earlier during this recording, and you said that a few months back when you came on the show as well. And that's a very meaningful statement, but I want to kind of dive into what you mean by that. When you say welcome home, what comes next, right? Because you don't want companies just to come back and exist here. You want them to thrive. So what is being done at the federal level to make sure that that is the opportunity that presents itself?
I think it's the holistic approach, right? Like this demolition approach, which we've had of removing all of these overburdensome regulations, making sure that developers feel protected, as we've just discussed, and then the construction phase of one, Genius, obviously being the stablecoin regulatory framework, and then obviously market structure to precede that. So, then we move on to implementation. I think that's going to take a lot of work from the interagency folks. I think this report, though, will give the confidence the industry needs and is looking for to say, yes, this is going to be the greatest place to participate in this space. And that's no different than any other space. We have the greatest capital markets in the world. The U.S. is the best place to do business, and it finally is for crypto as of today. And so this is an extremely exciting time for everyone. And I think that industry is going to be just overwhelmingly pleased with what they see come out of this today.
I think the industry is obviously really excited about the momentum that you guys have been building, obviously publishing the report. Kind of we talked about sort of meeting those goals that were laid out in the EO. You mentioned kind of the knowledge gap earlier, and any update to the BSA would obviously require some kind of congressional action. Those of us who are visiting the Hill kind of often, that knowledge gap persists, right? Like you just talked about, it's sort of this illicit finance kind of mantra that's being repeated. What can the White House do, or how are you working with your partners on the Hill to kind of close that gap? Or is there anything the industry can do to sort of continue to improve that relationship?
I said this, I think, when we did our first podcast together, I kind of view this office as being, like a Sherpa between White House policy, industry, interagency activity, and what's happening on Capitol Hill. So you have to pull all of these forces together to help eliminate a lot of the misinformation that tends to percolate out there. And then also, you're not, fighting is a strong word, but I will say you're having to push back against folks that have done things a certain way for a long time, and they grab onto misinformation that tends to make progress harder. And so what you'll find is with a lot of legislators, though, as soon as they're actually educated on these topics and they understand how important it is for the U.S., they come on side. I mean, that's why we had over 100 votes with Democrats on Genius. We had, immense bipartisan support for Clarity as well. I think we'll see that on the Senate side as soon as Clarity starts making its way through that chamber. So, what industry can do is continue to help us. I mean, between Tyler and I over at Treasury, who's fantastic, the Counselor of Digital Assets, the Treasury Secretary, we probably had over 1,000 meetings with industry, and that's not an exaggeration between the two of us over the course of the last 6 months. And so what we do is try to identify the actors on the Hill that need to be educated on these topics, work together to try to address their concerns. And I think that just continuing that engagement, working with the interagency folks, working with industry, going on podcasts like this to talk about how important this is to the United States, all of these things are helpful. And the more light that we can shine on the fact that this is actually a really good thing for the American consumer and it's progress for our financial system, the better.
Jacqueline mentioned welcome home. You like to say that. What do you say to, I guess, the DeFi community, perhaps software developers who are feeling a little bit discouraged right now that Roman Storm still is being prosecuted under the Trump administration's DOJ, when other messages from the administration seems to be overwhelmingly pro-crypto and welcoming software developers home, as you say, and encouraging them to build here?
Well, one, I'd encourage them to look at the specifics of every case. And I think that sometimes that can be lost as well on folks. Here, I think we're a unified front in terms of the administration's approach. That being said, I know that there's a lot of concern over specifically 1960 charges in the Roman case. I think that you'll probably see DOJ offer guidance and/or guidelines as to what they're actually doing here and what the purpose of this charge is.
Beyond the Blanche memo from April.
And I think that that's extremely important. Again, setting the ground rules and showing folks what exactly you can do and what you can't do. But what I will say is overwhelmingly, we want people developing code here. We obviously don't want it used for illicit activity, but we also understand that once code's created that can't be altered, someone shouldn't be prosecuted for someone else's misuse of that. And so, we take these things extremely seriously, and there is a fine line that you have to walk in order to get to the right outcome. But what you'll see is in this report as well, I think they're going to get a lot of guidance too as to what we want the DeFi community to be aware of. And I think they're going to be super pleased with it. I really do.
What about self-custody?
We absolutely believe in self-custody. This is also something that was part of the president's first digital assets executive order. We continually talk about this. We believe in the American consumer's right to house their own funds and not have other folks spy on them. I think that Warren Davidson's been the champion of the House on this. We appreciate his work. And again, words matter when you're talking about self-custody as well, right? And so I think we'll get to the right place legislatively there. I believe that people still believe, or the legislators still believe in American individualism and the right to privacy, and we're going to make sure we do everything we can to protect that in this space.
Bitcoin might sound complicated, but the Gemini credit card makes it simple. Use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. No annual fee, and right now you can grab a $200 Bitcoin intro bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stash. Go to gemini.com/CIA to learn more. Terms apply.
I want to ask about the role of the states there, because it's an interesting point. Obviously, it's a federal case, but SDNY has been very active. New York had like the BIT license regime, and that's been adopted in a couple of other different states. Clarity considers the issue of preemption over some of these statutes, and states are obviously looking at whether it's mirroring something like the strategic reserve in more friendly environments or looking at cracking down. I know Oregon kind of copy pasted, the Coinbase suit after that was dropped by the SEC at the federal level. How do you think about working with not just federal legislators, but also just individual states as part of this like broader mandate to make it, even state structures like the DUNA out in Wyoming? There's a lot of different approaches here. How do you guys think about how that fits into this?
Well, I think because we're taking such a holistic approach, it's actually a great outline for states to look at that want to engage in the space and attract, developers, companies, folks operating in the digital assets world. I think that this report will be a guiding document for a lot of folks that want to provide friendly environments for people to operate within. And then obviously on the legislative front, we'll continue to make sure that we're working with state partners so that they're comfortable with the direction that we're heading in. But, again, I can't reemphasize enough how important this will be as basically a guiding star to anyone that wants to attract people, companies, anyone, developers in this space to continue to build and work here in the U.S. and more specifically in their specific states.
The report also talks about a difference in modified versions of tax rules. I'm not a tax law expert, nor do I expect you to be, but when it comes to the report and what people should know, especially U.S. citizens and thinking about capital gains tax and the applications that have been applied to date, what are you trying to push for that would make it different?
Well, look, there's several things that we address in this report that I think the industry will be pleased with. Just honestly updating the tax code to be equal and also compliant. I mean, we don't want this space to be treated differently than any other space, and I think that is the overarching message you'll see here when we talk about tax. You'll hear from the Bitcoin community a lot about CAMT. We discussed that in this report. There's really exciting things I think that people have been waiting on for quite some time, just to get at least recognition that we're working on these things and trying to get to the best product.
Mm-hmm. What did you say, CAMT?
CAMT, yeah, corporate alternative minimum tax. It really, it's a big deal for Bitcoin miners and folks that are engaged in the Bitcoin space.
Right. Speaking of the Bitcoiners, I would love to know what's the update on a potential Bitcoin strategic reserve.
Well, look, we have it. It's been established through executive order in the SPR. We also have the strategic national stockpile. The digital assets national stockpile. I think that one, we wanted to recognize Bitcoin for being unique, and we talk about what that looks like and kind of the threshold that Bitcoin has created. It's in a class of its own, and everyone recognizes that. But we also wanted to give credence to the work and the development that's happening across other ecosystems, and that's why we have this national stockpile alongside. This actually requires some labor to get this set up properly. You have to build the infrastructure. You have to make sure that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's to get this done the right way and have long-term success with it. But I've said ad nauseum, we do believe in accumulation, obviously in budget-neutral ways, as the president's outlined. But there are countless ways that we can engage in that. We'll act on those that can be most expeditiously implemented. And I think that, people will be very pleased with the direction that we go in, and we'll start moving on that in short order. But obviously in this report, if you read the first digital asset EO, we're tasked with creating a clear and robust regulatory framework. And so that's what we focus on here. We understand the importance of the strategic Bitcoin reserve. We're enormous fans of Bitcoin and the Bitcoin community, and we want to deliver for them as well, and I'm certain that we will.
How much Bitcoin does the federal government have?
I can't discuss that right now.
Come on, give us a ballpark.
I can't.
Is it going to be made public?
There are several reasons in which we're not disclosing that at this time. There might be a time in which we do. But what I will say is, we want as much as we can possibly get. And that's what I continue to say, and we're going to continue to work on that.
And I'm curious there, I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask sort of on behalf of the industry, right? Bitcoin, obviously a very sort of different asset class, and I think we're all well aware of that, but there's been a lot of speculation about other assets that could potentially be added to a stockpile. One of the, I guess, interesting approaches that we've seen at the state level is, I believe it was New Hampshire, did this sort of like 500 billion market cap threshold, which obviously only really applies to Bitcoin at this point. Could you see, if there was a broadening of scope of the assets that were actually held in the stockpile, adopting some logic like that, as much as you can discuss it, like because I think everybody's very curious about what sort of ends up in that basket?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's multiple ways in which you could look at this. I think that the decentralization standards mean the most. And if you can get to a level that matches Bitcoin, and maybe there is a product that does that one day, right? And so we'll see what happens. And I know that other ecosystems are continuing to develop and thrive, but we still want these tokens to meet the same standard. And I think that there is a world in which, yeah, sure, there could be other additional assets added to a reserve, but we're not there yet. I think that we probably will get there eventually at some point, because I believe in American exceptionalism and in our ability to create and develop. And obviously, Bitcoin being, that golden standard, like we've said repeatedly, Bitcoin is digital gold. There's a world in which, yeah, you could see more assets added to that.
What's next for you guys? This is the accumulation of about 6 months' work. It was a stipulation of the president's executive order. What are you guys watching now, aside from clarity, hopefully passing, in the next couple months, aside from implementing these recommendations that are out in the report? What's next for you for digital assets as it comes to the White House's priorities?
Well, I think that we need to make sure that clarity gets across the finish line in the Senate. I think that leaders on both sides of the aisle certainly understand how important this is, and you're going to hear, the larger companies in this space, specifically the exchanges, be beating this drum consistently over the course of the next month, just to make sure that we have the momentum that we need heading into September to get this done properly. I'm confident in Chairman Scott and Leader Thune. I'm confident and really with folks on the other side of the aisle too, to understand how important this is to create basically a holistic regime that's necessary, for folks to continue to thrive and develop here in the U.S. And I'm confident that we'll get there. I think we have a great product in Clarity. A huge testament to Chairman Hill, Subcommittee Chair Brian Stile, all the folks that have put in just an immense amount of labor into getting this to a place in which industry is comfortable, and their colleagues on the other side of the Hill are comfortable as well. So, that's next, certainly. We want to see that done. And then obviously with this report, we start laying out like what implementation looks like. We'll apply those principles to Clarity as soon as we proceed. And I think that we'll be in a fantastic place.
One more from me. Do you foresee any intervention from the White House as it pertains to the Federal Reserve's treatment of cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency companies in terms of accessing master accounts, for example?
Well, I think you're already starting to see the Fed, move in the direction that the rest of the administration is. I think they understand that these technologies are here to stay, and that our banking system is going to be revolutionized by what's happening in the digital assets community. So we've already seen healthy guidance come out. They're going to continue to move in that direction, would be my expectation. The Vice Chair of Supervision, Mickey Bowman, is a huge supporter of the space, understands it really well. And we're confident that they'll continue to work alongside us to get to the best environment possible.
I think my last question for you is maybe a fun one. And I feel like, President Trump has spoken very publicly and been very pro-crypto, which I know a lot of people in the industry appreciate. But is there anything that would surprise our audience about how he feels about the industry or that he hasn't said publicly?
I just think that he's excited about it. He understands it better than most. I think that people would be shocked by truly how well he gets it, and how much he recognizes how important this space is, and that makes our lives a lot easier. So, thank you, President Trump, for everything that you've done for this community in this industry. I think that he's laying the groundwork again for a revolutionized financial system that will have a long-term impact that benefits the American consumer. And then I'd be remiss not to thank our AI and crypto czar, David Sachs, who's done a fantastic job in really both of those verticals. It's incredible to see how much he's doing. He's fantastic to work with, and we've just had a lot of fun along the way. But both of my bosses are tremendous, and it makes my life a lot easier and really a lot of fun.
It's great to have a good boss.
Well, Beau, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank
Congrats
you.
on the report.
Thanks for taking the time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.